these were templates, glass templates that were found in an attic in Zdunska Wola, which is the town of my great-grandparents. So the Missing Mezzuzot of Zdunska Wola actually is the first project. There's several that are coming forward now, but that's just a very powerful image for me, because those images, of course, many of us don't have any of them. So why Poland? Really, indeed, why Poland? It's a start. I don't know if it's a question that comes to your mind, but certainly my generation of children of survivors ask the question, like, why would you go back there? What is it in Poland that keeps you so animated and so riveted? Why would you do that? I mean, that's just a graveyard for us. Well, this is really a tale of two cousins. I'm one of the cousins, and I was born in Melbourne to two Holocaust survivors. And my other cousin is the son of my mother's sister. He stayed in Poland. She was a member of the Communist Party and hoped to start the brand new Poland. They, of course, were sent away in '68 with the purges. But we have very different complexions as people. I'm very much the child of survivors, and he's very much the son of Poland. He grew up with Polish as his first language, studying mathematics in Poland and having to have left. So he doesn't carry with him a lot of the stories that I do. I'm just going to hold that part of the story there, because I have a list of names here that come a long way in answering why Poland, and why you should be interested as genealogists in the story of Poland. So I don't know whether any of you know the name Darius Papilla. Darius Papilla is an Olympian. He's an Olympic canoeist, and he does slalom canoeing. He's a young man, probably in his 20s or 30s. He's an Olympian, and he has set up a fund to restore or to research all of the Jews of his town, Grzybów. So he set about a project of listing the 1,700 names of Jews who were of that town, and created a memorial. And that's an ongoing memorial. It's contemporary. It's happening today in Poland. So if anybody was to have emerged from Grzybów, you already have somewhere to go. You have a list of names that you can research. You have perhaps some Mazzevot that have been saved. So as a genealogist, that's a very vital and incredible tool to have. Krzysztof Bielewski works today at the Polin Museum. He has just published a book of 600 Jewish cemeteries through Poland. It's just been published in the last week. He researched the 600, he documented those that were destroyed by the Germans or destroyed by the Poles during the war and after the war, and has gone about listing them. So again, that's another vital tool for you as a genealogist. Joanna Lisek is again a young Polish woman who has written the book Kolisza, The Voice of Women, and she documents Yiddish women poets from the 16th century to 1939. These three women, Joanna Lisek, Bela Schwarzman-Czarnota, Karolina Szymaniec, together have made another huge contribution to that anthology of Yiddish poetry. These are contemporary women and men living in Poland today, really doing our research, doing things that are so invaluable to us in the original source. So as genealogists, you know the vitality and the importance of an original source. And these documents, we've got 1,000 years of Polish history, Polish Jewish history. We can't lose that. We need to send gossamer threads over the oceans to these people who are doing our research. I come now to Mike Tracin, who is an American man, not originally from Poland. I think his origins are in the UK, in the Ukraine. And every year he conducts a very important ceremony at the Galicia Museum. Some of you may have heard of the Krakow Jewish Music Festival. It's a bit like Limud Oz on steroids. And it was set up by a wonderful Polish gentleman by the name of Janusz Markuch. And every year this happens in Krakow, with the exception of this year because of COVID. Mike Tracin has set up a special fund and presents awards to people in the Polish community who have done outstanding research on our behalf. So that would be restoring cemeteries, conducting programs with kids in small villages, finding out about their Jewish neighbours. All of those people. To date, there are 100 Polish gentlemen and women who've conducted projects in their own small towns, informing the public. The last name on this list, I mean, and it's spelt incorrectly, so I apologise, it's Kamila Klauzinska, is my reason for the project. So my cousin Jan, who I mentioned at the beginning of this long list, would go back to Poland quite often, and he's my family genealogist. I'm not a genealogist, I'm an educator and I'm an artist. And he, on his visits to our great-grandparents' town, so my mother was the first of my family group to be born in Lodz. So my mother had 3 older siblings, his mother and 2 older brothers, and they were born in Zdunska Wola. So every year or so, Jan would go back to research our family history, and his research was aided and abetted by Kamila Klauzinska. Kamila was a young woman, a gorgeous, gorgeous woman of about 40 now, who, as a young kid, used to skip through this gorgeous, mystical, mythical garden of trees and hieroglyphics and beautiful deers and sculpted books. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know where she was going. And the truth is that she was going through our cemetery. So the Zdunska Wola cemetery, and cemeteries in Poland are particularly beautiful. They have images that are inscribed and sculpted across the top. I think Zdunska Wola was a particularly artistic town. And she, in her research, restored as much as she could of the cemetery and actually catalogued it with the help of Daniel Wagner, who's an Israeli chemist. I'm going to flick this screen now because I think Camilla's on the next screen, and I'm going to play you a little bit of Camilla speaking to my friends. My friend Judy Menzel made the film Pockets of Hope. Some of you may have seen it. And this is an excerpt from that film where she talks about her time with the Zdunska Wola cemetery.
Auf dem Weg steht der Boy, steht herangebeugt. Alle Vögel in dem Boy sehnen sich zu fliegen. Drei kein Mare, drei kein Misrech, ohne Recht kein Drogen.
Hello, my name is Kamila Klauzinska. I am a Zdunska Wola. I live here. I take care of Jewish cemetery for 15 years, and I graduated in Jagiellonian University in Department of Jewish Study last year. I am a doctor of Judaic study, and I focus my attention on Jewish genealogy. Okay, so I come here first time when I was a little child because I used to live very close to the cemetery, and we came here with my friends and we find this place like a magic garden, and we didn't know what the stones with beautiful symbols means. Some hirsch and I don't know, some flowers and trees and candles. So it was just like a magic place. And what that place means, we learn many years later. my adventure with this place start when the Professor Goldberg came to Lodz University, and I invited her. She suggested I should write my thesis about the cemetery, and so I take care for 15 years with my husband and also with the group of volunteers from Zdunska Wola and from Dąbrowa Górnicza. We take care of this place, and we hope that our work will preserve Jewish memory of our town to the end of the world and even one day more.
Sorry, I have to take this to the end, sorry. Okay, gone. Thank you. So what do I do now? I mean, there's this extraordinary young woman who's done so much for my ancestry, for my people. How is it possible that I could allow somebody else, a young Polish Catholic woman, to do more for my history and for my story than I'm doing? It sort of didn't compute for me. So you've got here on the page the vision, but what I decided I would do, I'm going to go forward one. What I decided to do was, and what could I do, was to capture the stories as best I could. In this image, you've got my mother here, and this is a group of former residents from Zdunska Wola who met in Melbourne in September 2014. And I started to ask questions and I started to document stories, and we really got some very, very, very beautiful stories from people. The thing that was unique about this, and again, as genealogists, you may not have thought of that, but the questions, I wasn't asking the questions that you would traditionally ask as genealogists, because those questions are often documented. You know, how many people in the family, what position were you in the family, how old were you, what did you do? So they were kind of the obvious questions. So what I did was that I started to ask more oblique questions, I think, maybe less scientific and maybe more artistic. But what it did was it gave me an insight into people's worlds. So I'll give you an example. So I said to my mother, what colour do you see when you think of Zdunska Wola? And she said to me, red. Well, I don't know about you, but I went straight to blood. And I thought, don't say anything, don't say anything, don't contaminate this ground. And I said, whoa, red, why red? And she said, she slapped me on the arm and she said, well, you know, my grandfather had a red beard and he always tickled me with his beard when he kissed me. So you can see how a very out of left field question gave, in fact, very important information. And you often don't need a lot of information. What you want is a thumbnail of what a family was like at any given time. So I set about collecting some of those stories. Some of those stories we had more readily, some of them not so much. So, okay, what then to do with the stories? So I'll go back to that image. So the vision was this, that it had to be an exhibition, which should be an installation of mezuzot. Like, why mezuzah? Because the mezuzah represents every family home. Even if you weren't religious, in those days you had a mezuzah on your home. So it was then a metaphor for every Jewish family that lived in Zdunska Wola before the war. And then it became a kind of epitaph, but a way also to celebrate the diversity and vibrancy of life before the war. So just so you know, historically there were 12,000 Jews living in Zdunska Wola before 1939. We approximate 3,000, 4,000 families, which is why the installation was to be 3,000 mezuzot. Also because this is in Poland, not a religious project, because mezuzah evokes ideas of religiosity. And also it's not related to restitution or reclamation of property. I really didn't want this project to be contaminated or polluted with that. It's very much a celebration of Jewish life and where we're coming, you know, of our history, so that the next generations could really celebrate and enjoy that. So the purpose of this, I'm sorry, this is not a very clear slide. The purpose of the Missing Mezzuzot Project was to celebrate the vibrant energy and diversity of Jewish life in pre-war Zdunska Wola. So understand that to also mean it's to debunk a lot of the stereotypes that Poles have about us and even Australians have about us. We're not a group of people who walk around with side locks. I don't have a wig. Barbara doesn't have a wig either. Some of you may, but not for religious purposes, I imagine. It's also to acknowledge the contribution of the small community of Zdunska Wola. So not only did the Jewish community contribute to itself and its own economy, its contribution was bigger than that. Its contribution was to a small town which kept things going. So, for example, Zdunska Wola, like a number of the small towns around Lodge, were like cottage industries that fed into a much larger manufacturing town. So some of you may know that Lodge was like the Manchester of Poland, and Zdunska Wola had a dyeing industry, a wool industry, a spinning industry, and all of that fed into the main town and into the towns around. It's to preserve the names of those who disappeared without a trace. So very much like Darius Papilla is doing, is trying to get as many of the names as we possibly can and add them to the Yad Vashem list. Provide the next generations with the knowledge of their history alongside that of the Holocaust. So my feeling is very strongly that our children and the next generations need to know that there's another history. It's not just a Holocaust history. There was a vibrant, live, living, engaging community that contributed a lot. And while the stories of the Holocaust are really more compelling because they're dangerous and scary, the truth is that there was another normal life story that our children are entitled to know. It's to stimulate intergenerational discussion. So my children we've had lots of talks about the differences and stories about grandparents and great-grandparents where we could. I mean, many of us were not able to do that, but it's also the future generations. So if we're looking forward, I really want other kids to know that there wasn't just a Holocaust. And I never want anybody to say, whoa, they murdered 6 million, wow. They must have been some sort of strange people that they felt they could do this. So it's really important to normalise our past lives, you know, as something that was ordinary like everybody else. It's also to encourage and promote intercultural dialogue and understanding. So since this project began, 1,000 Polish school children from in the environ have come into the gallery, have come into the museum. This is now permanent in the Museum of Zdunska Wola, this installation. And the kids are engaged with headphones and listening to stories and involved. So I feel my work is not done, but it's en route. We're on the way. And it's important that I create an engaging, interactive work, which is also beautiful. So you can see here, this is part of the design. The soil here at the bottom, the light soil, is soil from the Mount of Olives. So I see that soil in Jerusalem. I see that soil as representative of all of us as Jews, as our ancestral land. Because how else does one unify all of us? What's the symbolic way to connect us all? And the only way I could think of was soil and the land of Israel. This thin layer here is taken from the gates of the Zdunska Wola cemetery. There was a big discussion amongst the Melbourne group. There was one guy, Benny, who's not alive anymore, he said, I don't want any verstunkene soil from Poland in this installation. What are you doing? What do you think? And I said, oh, okay, thinking, oh, how am I going to redo this one? It's like, I don't know. And he said, okay, I'll agree if you take it from the Jewish cemetery. Well, I wasn't going to take it from the Jewish cemetery, but I did take it from the gates, just as between the actual cemetery, which would be sacred ground, and between and the outside, and Zdunska Wola property. So that layer of sand, which you'll see everywhere, is Zdunska Wola. Here, where the mezuzah is visible, where I've wound the parchment back to front, is representative of those families that didn't survive. So that's a really poignant one. Where there is, you'll see in the next images, where there is soil to the top, it shows that that family's life thread continued into other countries. This is Camilla here giving an explanation to a young boy in the exhibition on the day of opening. So this is, again, this shows you a family that survived. Whoops, all these surprises. And the family that didn't survive. So here, this family, this is Rabbi Newman's family, and we have an address here, Zdunska Shedem. So that's really interesting, because Zdunska Shedem 7 was across the road from my great-grandparents. So by doing this project, I actually started to meet my great-grandparents' neighbours and the descendants of their neighbours, which was a really extraordinary experience. So Rabbi Newman survived, he survived, his family didn't, and this is soil from Champaign, Illinois. That's where he survived. And there's a memorial mezuzah with every family, really, because all of us exacted terrible losses. There was very few families that didn't lose somebody. So this says, this is Rabbi Newman, this is his family address, and here it says Newman Zginęły, which is the Polish word for perished, lost. And why glass? Because glass is transparent. It has luminosity and clarity and transparency, all of those things that I equate with education and with knowledge. So, and fragility, I thought that was really important. And which brings me back also the nature of fragility to Camilla and to Darius and those people before, is that it's so important, and again to the soil, let's link back to the soil again, that Poland is actually the home of our sacred sites. That in Poland we have our grave sites and we have our grave sites, and it is people like Camilla, Darius, Janusz who look after our sacred sites, and they're very important to us, and they're important to you as genealogists, because that's how you will find a lot of extra answers, because it's so hard to find in a foreign country and in a foreign language all of the material that you need. The next slide is a bit of a gift from me to you. I don't know how many of you are aware that every town in Poland, and as I found out today from Barbara in Germany, that there was a census list, and housed probably in a museum or in the council archives is a list of something that's called a residence card. I'm going to show you that card now.
I've got that too.
Who's got that? Yep, hang on, where is this? There it is, here we go. I'm just going to move this out of the way. So this is the residence card of my great-grandparents. Their surname was Tondowski. Mężczyzna, that's the name of the man, and his name was Idel. The woman is Hanna, and her maiden name is Domo, means from home. Her maiden name was Krunt. So you already have another generation here, which goes back. Then his parents, Imieniu Rodziców, his parents' names were, Idel's parents' names were Abraham and Sirla, and her maiden name was Jakubowicz. So again, we've got another generation. Hannah's parents were Laser and Perla, and Perla's family name was Moscovich. Here on the right-hand side is the Zavod is profession and standing. And so my great-grandfather was the caretaker of the house. It was a block, it's a block of flats, a small block. And the next line down is the date of birth. So my great-grandfather was born on the 13th of May, 1867, and his wife, I'm not really sure, I can't see because in pencil. And this is their place of birth. And this is their place of where they were married. And this is their religion. It's Moishove, which is Jewish, like after Moses. Here it talks about where my great-grandmother had come from and when she moved. Oops, sorry, very enthusiastic I am. And this is one of their daughters. So I imagine that this residence card happened after my great aunt's older sister had moved out of home. This is her date of birth. And she was born in Zdunska Wola. On the back of that card, you have when they moved to this area and where they moved from and the dates that they had moved into the area. So they're very specific, and the address. Some of these have got lists of addresses. You can track the addresses from where people have moved from. Many of these have lots of children, like the Warszawski family who were part of our group got their whole family history from this. I actually found their residence card and all of the missing names, like Benny said, he'd been in Zdunska Wola, he didn't know what the names of his father's brothers and sisters were, or his mother's, and I could actually give them to him as a gift, which was a really amazing opportunity. So after some time, this was it. We managed to put together the first 100. This first 100 still exists in the museum. You can see that it wasn't supported necessarily financially, but it was supported by very important institutes. Polin Museum, Sydney Jewish Museum, Australian Society of Polish Jews, that's us, and the former residents of Zdunska Wola in Israel, and Polish Roots, that's Camilla, who also works as a genealogist. So that exhibition is pretty, what I didn't do was put in a photograph of that exhibition. So I'll have to send it one to you later. Apologise for that.
What's the parcels like? Oh, right.
Sorry. So what this project has achieved so far, the launch of the project in Poland was heralded by an group of international academics who came to the Polin summer school. Sorry about the grammar there. And they came to a talk in Zdunska Wola about the project. And they said that that was the most important one that they had attended. The group that had come from Europe to the Polin summer school was apparently a little bit anti-Semitic. And I was told that in private by one of the teachers, so I used the platform to talk about the privilege of being there and the importance of their role in the broader world to inform people of what they had witnessed and what they had learned. And the reporting is that I did a fairly good job, that things were better. The Israeli students were certainly feeling much more comfortable after that talk, which was really a shame. These people were only in their 20s. Anyway, we had a 4-page article in Newsweek, in Polish Newsweek. Over 1,000 children from the region have been through the exhibition and learnt about their neighbours. And just recently, Gabriela Gorska, the education officer of the Zdunska Wola Museum, created a delightful audiovisual program through the eyes of a young Natan Blitzblau, a Jewish child living in Zdunska Wola before the war. So this child goes through the exhibition and discusses the mezuzahs and explains what a mezuzah is and explains what all the different professions were. It's a really beautiful program, but it's in Polish, so I didn't put it up for you. I didn't know how many of you speak Polish, but I'm very happy to send the link to all of you. What was particularly special is that Nathan Blitzblau is the father of a very close friend of mine in Melbourne, which is another interesting non-formal way of looking at genealogy. Of 12,000 Jews from Zdunska Wola, 200 survived the war. Of that 200, I don't know how many migrated to Australia, but I can tell you that 3 of my closest friends come from Zdunska Wola and their families do, but I wouldn't have known that had I not done the project. It's just, are we so similar in our makeup or our movement through the world that we're connected to each other in ways that are indescribable. And that's just another interesting and beautiful thing about the project. So I now know who my neighbours are. I now know who my friends are from that region and how connected I really am to that Polish history. In a way, that kind of comes to the end of my formal presentation. Are there... sorry. Get rid of him. So I don't think I've forgotten anything. I think I've mentioned everything I wanted to mention. I'm going to look to my friend Barbara to say, is there anything I should have said that I haven't said, Barbara?
What's the date today?
Today is the 30th. Ah, that's right at the end. Thank you. Today is... It's always good to have friends. There is a slide that follows that one. But today it is the anniversary of the liquidation of the Lodge Ghetto. It's a 76th anniversary. Ordinarily, in non-COVID times, we would be having, there would be a commemoration service. My grandparents and my mother's youngest sibling were transported from the Lodge Ghetto probably in this last roundup. So it's a very poignant and powerful day for me. This next video, if you like, is one of the stories that was collected by a filmmaker, Menachem Daum. You may have come across him. He did a Polish film called Hiding and Seeking. His family come from Zdunska Wola and were also neighbours of my parents. He interviewed Rabbi Neumann, who was then an advisor to, I think, to Bush, one of the Bushes in America. So he was very religious. He was a Gera Hasid growing up. After the war, he became Reform, and he was an advisor to the President of the United States. We don't do things in half doses in that town. There was something in the water, but I'll tell you about the water story later. Yes, Barbara.
Just before you go and play that, I think it is very relevant that we respond to a comment that came through from Terry Ashton, who said his great-grandparents, now I'm not sure my pronunciation will be good, but Kaskiel, David and Hendel Praskia are buried in the cemetery that you showed.
Is that right? Hello, neighbour. It'd be great to speak afterwards. I think, Kerry, have you made contact with me before? Just through Aaron Blickblau? Is that, anyway, we can talk about that later. Yeah.
The answer's yes.
Yeah, I thought so because I remember the name.
Right, okay.
Amazing. So I don't know, would people like to see this next little video or not so much?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, well, I'm going to press play then.
I got food, money to buy some candles for the house. And I was in that store and they were this delicious chocolate-covered cookies. And I had, I don't know, 30 cents or 50 cents that was necessary for 4 candles. And I wanted to do what my mother told me, and I always did it. But this time I thought 2 candles and 2 cookies would do. So I bought 2 cookies and bought 2 candles and placed the candlesticks on the mantle that had a mirror in them. And I figured, well, she light the candles and she will look at them and see that the image of the candles in the mirror. And this would be my getaway, my rescue. She asked, where are the candles? And I said, here. But they're only 2. But look at the mirror. She said nothing. She didn't want to versteer the Shabbos, to disturb the Sabbath. Not a word. Saturday afternoon, usually Father would have a dialogue with us, ask us what we learned this week, and I had no problem about the tests. I studied because I enjoyed it, not to please anybody. I enjoyed studying. So everybody would get, depending on the season, a certain amount of food. So you got a handful of cherries, blueberries, or whatever else the fruits were, pumpkin seeds, whatever. I got exactly half. And I didn't see that I did worse than my brother or my sisters. At the moment, I didn't remember about anything else. All I remembered was I have been wronged. Why was I get? And I asked, where's the other half? What other half? The ones that everybody got. She said, come with me, took me over to the mirror and showed me. So I learned, A, you cannot trick your mother. B, that there is reward and punishment. And it hurt momentarily. But the moment she said it, I figured she's got a point. And she got it across perfectly well. My mother was not vindictive and usually forget things quickly. But this time, I think, A, she was right, and B, she had a lesson to teach me.
That boy.
Right here.
Yeah.
There, stay there.
So that's the beautiful Rabbi Newman, who was an extraordinary fellow.
That's a lady speaking.
Yeah. So as you can
That
see,
is-
most of these exhibitions and works cannot happen in a vacuum. There are many people who have worked before me, and many people I hope will take up the baton afterwards. But I do acknowledge that these people have been very significant in the making of this project. And so Camilla, who's been involved in Genealogy for a long time. This is my cousin Jan, who lives now in California. Professor Daniel Wagner, who is a materials chemist in Israel. Adela Hoffman, I'm not sure if she's still alive anymore. And these other people as well, who have contributed a great deal to the whole project. So as I said, nothing exists in isolation. Everything is part of the bigger picture and part of a whole. And I think as genealogists, you are more than aware of that, because you are always dependent on other people's work or other people's assistance in just pointing you in the right direction. I hope that this little explanation or journey through my exhibition has helped you a little bit in your thinking and provided you with some food for thought. Thank you very much for your time.